Welcome to Xiao Voice. Continuing from the previous episode 212. Xiao Yan's eyes were fiery hot as he observed the room where the fluctuation had formed earlier. Shock and joy was difficult to hide on his face. He had clearly sensed the existence of the spiritual aura when he entered his training state earlier. Spiritual aura was a kind of extremely mysterious energy. It did not possess the might of Do Qi, but it was a great nourishment to one's soul. However, spiritual aura seemed to be mixed in everything and was extremely difficult to sense. During ancient times, alchemists were able to sense spiritual aura's existence and absorb it due to them possessing some special soul skills. However, in this era, the mysterious soul skills had completely disappeared. There were few alchemists who knew how to sense spiritual aura and absorb it. Xiao Yan had tried an unknown number of methods in order to sense spiritual aura. However, his efforts were futile with the exception of his entries into those mysterious states, which had caused him to feel quite helpless. Spiritual aura was really a great luxury to the alchemists of this era. The joy on Xiao Yan's face was gradually withdrawn. He suppressed the fluctuations within his heart and once again slowly sank into his mind. He continuously chanted the word formula he had obtained from the spirit nourishment powder. Xiao Yan shut his eyes and continued chanting for half an hour. The quiet space within the room finally began to show signs of a slight fluctuation once again. The fluctuation did not cause Xiao Yan to feel overly shocked this time around. From his senses, he was able to tell that threads of extremely tiny, chaotic flows had suddenly appeared in this empty space that was filled with natural energy. These flows were hidden very deep and were covered by dense natural energy. If not for the word formula, Xiao Yan would not have been able to detect the flows. Are these spiritual auras? Xiao Yan's mind focused on these faint flows. A moment later, he began to understand something. These kinds of spiritual auras were extremely faint, and they were very weak. Even if they were occasionally absorbed into one's body, they would be crushed by the surrounding natural energy during circulation. No wonder there were very few people who could sense the existence of spiritual auras. Xiao Yan felt joy within his heart as he sensed the existence of spiritual auras for the first time under his normal training condition. If he managed to successfully absorb these spiritual auras, his soul would sooner or later advance to the soul state after being gradually filled by these spiritual auras. At that time, his alchemist level would definitely be able to advance to the 8th tier guru stage. The 7th tier was the grandmaster stage, the 8th tier was the guru stage. The difference between these tiers was one that was extremely difficult to overcome. If Xiao Yan were able to successfully advance to the 8th tier, even those super strong elite dozuns would treat him politely. With this status, Xiao Yan clearly understood the treatment he would receive even from Xuan Er's Gu clan would definitely not be poor. After all, a tier 8 alchemist was quite a rare existence even on the Do Qi continent. In order to obtain a tier 8 medicinal pill, some experts of the Dozun class would be willing to lower themselves to act as a bodyguard for someone. This was something that one did not even need to mention. A fiery heart rose within Xiao Yan's heart as the various benefits and treatments he would receive after advancing to the 8th tier flashed across his heart. He hurriedly calmed his heart. After which, he was suddenly stunned. The reason why he was stunned was because Xiao Yan had suddenly discovered that he did not possess a method to absorb the spiritual auras. That anonymous word formula had given him the ability to sense spiritual auras, but did not teach him the method to absorb them. A spiritual aura was not like natural energy where one could randomly absorb it. A spiritual aura was extremely fragile. Even the slightest pressure would cause it to disappear. If one did not possess a special method to extract the spiritual aura from the great amount of natural energy, it was impossible for one to successfully absorb it. Xiao Yan sat in a stunned silence like a fool. At that moment, he felt as though he wanted to cry, but tears would not come out. He had managed to sense the existence of spiritual auras after much difficulty. In the end, he discovered that he was unable to absorb them. It was just like he had discovered a treasury that was filled with gold, only to end up discovering that the treasury was locked when he got there. He could only look at it from the door, but could not put the gold into his bag. Oh, there is still more to this word formula. This part that I have learned is only a small portion of it. Xiao Yan finally recovered after a while. He bitterly smiled, shook his head, and lamented. Xiao Yan sighed. He was dull for a moment before he finally violently clenched his teeth. Everything was always difficult in the beginning. He had already endured through this most difficult beginning. How could he be unable to resolve the subsequent problems? Since he did not have a method to absorb it, he would use the stupidest method. Absorption through swallowing. Xiao Yan once again entered the training condition after having made up his mind. After which, he widened his mouth and violently absorbed the natural energy mixed with spiritual auras into his body. Before Xiao Yan had the time to control this energy that had just entered his body, the wisps of weak spiritual auras mixed in with the energy were like porcelain vases. With a clang, the whips was pressed until nothing was left before disappearing. The first failure did not exceed Xiao Yan's expectations. It would really be strange if he managed to succeed at such a thing the first time around. After refining the natural energy that he had absorbed into his body, into Do Qi, which merged into his body, Xiao Yan once again sucked in another cluster of natural energy. This time around, he isolated the wisps of spiritual auras mixed within the energy with lightning-like speed the moment it entered his body. Subsequently, he carefully removed the energy around the spiritual auras a little at a time, much like removing the silk from a cocoon. This was a task that really tested Xiao Yan's ability to control his mind. With Xiao Yan's current control ability, he only managed to remove finger-sized wisp of a faint spiritual aura from the energy after having failed over 20 times. Xiao Yan sighed in relief, appearing as though he had been relieved of a great burden. He looked at the spiritual aura he had managed to obtain after spending over an hour. Fortunately, he was able to sense the position of the spiritual aura by relying on this anonymous word formula. Otherwise, this kind of stripping method would definitely not work. Moreover, even with this being the case, he had spent a little too much time. However, Xiao Yan understood that once he practiced until he was familiar with the method, he should be able to increase the output. Although it would not be comparable to using an orthodox absorption method, it would, at the very least, enable his soul to fill with spirituality. Reaching the soul state and breaking through to a Tier 8 alchemist was only a matter of time. Xiao Yan's mind carefully controlled this tiny wisp of spiritual aura and gradually shifted it up. After which, it entered the spot between his eyebrows. Xiao Yan immediately felt a cooling feeling being transmitted from his mind after this wisp of spiritual aura entered the spot between his eyebrows. His heart was quickly filled with joy. He understood that this was a phenomenon that would only occur after the spiritual aura within his soul grew. Clearly, this method of his might be clumsy, but at least it did something. Regardless of what the case was, it was, at the very least, better than having gained nothing. It is indeed difficult without any orthodox training methods. Xiao Yan involuntarily let out a bitter laugh when this wisp of spiritual aura entered his soul. Just this single wisp of spiritual aura had exhausted 1 hour of his time. The effort he had put in and the reward he had obtained were not even. However, he did not have any other solution at this moment. After all, regardless of how small it was still something. If other Tier 7 high-grade alchemists were aware that he was able to absorb spiritual aura, it was likely that their eyes would turn red from envy. This was the case even if it was only a tiny wisp of spiritual aura. After comforting himself in his heart, Xiao Yan sighed, and he once again focused his mind, entering his training state. Next, he began the incomparably difficult and complicated task of extracting spiritual aura. An entire night swiftly flowed by amid Xiao Yan's tireless training. Xiao Yan, who was seated on a bed, finally opened his eyes when the first rays of morning light landed in his room. His dark black eyes appeared to have gained an exceptional sparkle. After an entire night's effort, Xiao Yan had successfully absorbed 8 wisps of spiritual aura. This was a result that he had only obtained after he had become familiar with the method toward the end of the night, reducing a significant amount of time in the process. The absorption of 8 wisps of spiritual aura caused the spiritual aura within Xiao Yan's soul to fill. Hence, a night of exhaustion not only did not cause Xiao Yan to feel the least bit tired but had instead gave him a kind of extremely refreshed feeling. It did not lose to the refreshness of training for an entire night. Xiao Yan let out a long breath and leapt down from his bed. He was quite satisfied with the results of the night. Although the effect of this night could not be compared with that of him having entered a unique state, it won in terms of being long-lasting. As long as Xiao Yan desired it, he would be able to absorb spiritual auras anytime he wished. Based on this speed, reaching a Tier 8 alchemist was only a matter of time. After arranging his clothes, Xiao Yan, who felt refreshed, pushed the door open and exited the room. He saw Yi Zhang, the little fairy doctor, and the rest were already waiting for him in the courtyard when he exited the room. Yi Zhang hurriedly raised his head when the room's door opened. Only after seeing that Xiao Yan's condition was excellent did he sigh in relief. Xiao Yan smiled to the group. He was naturally aware of Yi Zhang's anxiety. Today was the day of the so-called 5 Great Clan test. The test today would determine the fate of the Yi clan in the future. Everything rested on Xiao Yan's shoulders alone. One could even say that the life and death of all the members of the Yi clan were held in Xiao Yan's hand. Mr. Xiao Yan, are you prepared? Yi Zhang cupped his hands together and respectfully asked. He clearly understood that today was the day that the Yi clan's fate would be determined. Xiao Yan slowly nodded as he looked at the elderly face of Yi Zhang. He inhaled a deep breath of air and took the lead, walking out of the Yi manor. This relaxed laughter caused Yi Zhang's tensed heart to slightly relax. Let's go. Today, I shall meet these so-called 5 great clans and see just what abilities they have.